Our next witness is Jeff Paterson, Government Affairs for Developmental Disabilities Alliance of Western New York, and following Jeff will be Michael Searock. Sorry about that. I appreciate everybody's patience too. We know we're going long here, but you know, I hope that our determination and grit will not fall on deaf ears in the next few months.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Senator Mannion, for your leadership. Thank you, Senator Martucci, Senator Serino, and your colleagues for your time and your advocacy. I'm Jeff Paterson. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of a provider agency in Niagara County, and I'm testifying today on behalf of the Developmental Disabilities Alliance of Western New York. Donnie represents 40 not-for-profit providers from Buffalo down to the Southern Tier and over to the Finger Lakes. I've submitted written testimony with a lot of statistics. I'm not going to read all of them, but it does bear mentioning that in the Western region, vacant DSP positions have increased 34.5% over last year, 51.2% over 2019. Our member agencies have 3,000 vacant staff positions right now, and if you calculate that, it represents more than 4 million hours annualized of authorized supports that cannot be delivered. Families taking their loved ones home because 24/7 certified houses don't have enough staff. Parents stuffing flyers in mailboxes trying to find people to be DSPs. Children going without supports, parents going without respite, hoping they can get through another day. People with disabilities who want to work but don't have employment counselors to help them live their best lives. People living in apartments who have to plan what time of day they'll use the bathroom around the spotty schedules of their support staff. DSPs, mostly women and disproportionately women of color, trying to make a decent living and hoping they don't get mandated to cover those multiple shifts that we've heard so much about so they can see their kids and go to their second and third jobs. Managers working the floor and praying their paperwork can wait just a little bit longer before the state surveyor shows up. Exhausted staff working multiple shifts, trying not to make a mistake that the Justice Center will tag them with for the rest of their lives. This is the human toll of poor public policy. And make no mistake, while the pandemic has made it worse, it began long before COVID, as we've established today, and it will not be miraculously resolved whenever the pandemic mercifully ends. We know that DSPs made well above the minimum wage before and now barely make minimum wage. 2.6 billion in cuts and no COLAs over a decade brought us to this point. Budget neutrality that took the steam out of the Be Fair to Direct Care increases that were awarded. And even now, OPWDD is aggressively pushing another residential cut, which is causing providers to hold on to funds that could otherwise be used to support the workforce. And I was astonished to hear the perspective from OPWDD that somehow those cuts would not affect DSPs. Where do they think that those effects will be? How can a $238 million cut not affect the workforce? So thanks to the American Rescue Plan, New York State has more than $500 million. That's great, but that American Rescue Plan was signed into law on March 11th. Those revenues were included in the state budget past April 7th, and we're sitting here on September 14th, and provider agencies still don't know what we're getting or how it can be used. So we've gone into our own thin cash reserves to pay emergency bonuses and raises to keep the system from totally collapsing with no support from the state. And we know that support will come eventually, but it's critical that New York State begin planning now for what happens when the federal funds are gone. We cannot give a temporary bump to DSPs and then shove them off a fiscal cliff in a year or two. And we also know that all of that hinged on one runoff election in another state. And if not for that, those dollars wouldn't have come to New York State at all, which shows us that New York State has to get some skin in this game. Overzealous oversight is also to blame. The Justice Center has effectively criminalized error, and DQI surveyors show very little understanding or empathy of this existential crisis that we're in, or the power dynamics inherent in their work. Their demeanor is often so confrontational and intimidating that DSPs call off so they don't have to be in the presence of these surveyors. Surveyors need a higher standard of effective communication and cultural competence. And we need a top to bottom review of regulatory enforcement, because we see that New York State has no tools to uplift the workforce, only punitive processes that discourage people from working in the field. We have some information in our testimony about the career ladder, and we certainly agree with all that has been said. I would just point out that if we don't deal with compression, we effectively collapse the career ladder. And the policy of the previous administration was compression doesn't exist. That's not something we're concerned about. We need to be concerned about it. Sometimes providers are seen as the boy who cried wolf. You know, we say we can't do it, and then we figure out a way to do it because we care so much about the people we support, and we make the unworkable work. There is a limit to our resilience. We have no more rabbits. We have no more hats to pull rabbits out of. We need help. Our staff needs help. The people we support need help. Their families need help. And I would just end by saying that at the outset of the pandemic, we heard DSPs called, as we've heard, heroes and essential workers. How soon we forget. Let's not forget any longer. Thank you again for shining a light on these critical issues.
Thank you, Mr. Paterson. I appreciate it. You know, for me, who's relatively new to coming in and learning a lot about this world, can you just give me some perspective on what some of those rabbits are that are no longer in hats? Like, what are some of the things that agencies had to do to pivot to just maintain? And I think I know a lot of those, but maintain, you know, their own solvency and then maintain support for the people that need it.
Well, agencies have reduced management positions, have reduced leadership positions, have had administrative staff go years without increases in some cases so that we could put money down on the direct care workforce. So agencies are running very, very lean. Agencies are foregoing capital improvements that need to be done. You know, doing everything from renegotiating health insurance to looking at all of their benefit packages so that every dollar that can be squeezed out can go to the direct care workforce. We've run out of those efficiencies, and you get to a point where, you know, my agency alone, we've cut numerous middle management positions because we knew we couldn't cut DSP, so numerous middle management and senior management positions. Well, now guess who's covering the floor when we don't have enough DSPs? Middle managers and even senior leaders. And their ranks have been depleted, and they're burned out, and now that layer of people is leaving. So, you know, when I say the rabbits are gone and the hats are gone, those are just some examples, and there are many more. I often point to, you know, several years ago there was this capital nonprofit capital infrastructure program, and it was mind-boggling to me because it was like, all right, we're going to invite not-for-profits to apply for necessary capital improvements like roofs and, you know, IT and this kind of stuff, parking lots and all these things and furnaces that people haven't been able to do. Well, if you just put the money in the darn rate, agencies would be able to do it. You wouldn't have to run these superfluous grant programs. So, you know, agencies have just gone without doing those basic things that need to be done. So we heard earlier, agencies need to invest in their business acumen. With what? Using what? For money. You know, you got leaking roofs you can't replace. You got broken down parking lots you can't pave. And all so that we can just put every dollar we can into the workforce, and enough is enough.
Thank you for indulging me on that one. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for your testimony. And one of the things that I just picked out from what you had said that I think is really important, and certainly something you brought to my attention, is the relationship that these surveyors have from the Justice Center with many of the DSPs and the organizations that you're talking about. It certainly is something I think that we have to keep in mind here in terms of understanding what that relationship is, because while I can clearly see there's a value in making sure that we maintain standards, at the same time, that relationship can't be one that's punitive, especially, you know, kicking you when you're down, so to speak. It sounds like people are doing everything they possibly can to keep the process moving, keep the wheels on the wagon, and to have someone come and have this sort of relationship where it's literally driving people away from the profession because of that relationship is just the state contributing to its own problems.
Yes, and very often there are power dynamics in terms of gender and race at play. that some of these surveyors are not sensitive to, and I think we need to look at what the training requirements are for surveyors who work for the Division of Quality Improvement in OPWDD, because there is very little sensitivity. We've had staff in tears, and they're good surveys, not even very few deficiencies, but just the demeanor, people feel like they're under the gun, they're on the hot seat, and they get nervous, and very often they just don't want to be there when that's happening. It's very disturbing. And in addition to, I mean, in the middle of a pandemic, we literally had surveyors coming in and citing us on crumbs in a toaster. I mean, these are the kinds of things that and you're looking at it saying, we are literally fighting to keep people safe and alive in the middle of a pandemic, and you're telling us we have too many crumbs in the toaster. This is what providers deal with, that we should be, spending our attention and time lifting up this workforce, not tearing them apart.
Agreed.
Quick follow-up on that. Did the frequency of the surveys that were conducted decrease dramatically during COVID?
The in-person surveys did decrease, then they started up again. Now we're told they are going to be decreasing again and focusing more on COVID protocols. But for the short time that they did resume, there was very little recognition that we had been in a pandemic. So, you'd have a surveyor come in and say, why wasn't this fixed? And we would say, well, we couldn't have people come into the house for infection control purposes. It was not a health and safety issue, not a huge issue, just something that normally you would fix that you couldn't. And they would say, well, we're going to cite you on that. We know you couldn't have maintenance come in, but we're going to cite you anyway. I mean, these are unrealistic expectations.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Paterson. I appreciate all your advocacy and work, and safe travels back to Western New York.
Right back at you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.